Welcome to the Just Regular Guys podcast,
where we give our non-expert opinions on the things that matter. Devin, we saw Jordan Peterson. What did you think of that?
Yes, we did. It was awesome. I have been wanting to see Jordan Peterson for a while. I was really excited to be able to for the first time. Also, you and I don't get the opportunity to, do things and hang out in person all that often because we're a couple hours away from each other. So that was cool just to, spend an evening together.
Yeah, it was definitely worth the drive for you and Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Dr. Jordan Peterson. Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of his, and I'm about to hype him up plenty, I'm sure. We got lots to talk about as far as him and his impact on us personally, and, what he's kind of been doing for the last few years, and the actual, speaking that we witnessed. But I'll just, kind of lead off and say that he's by far, I think, one of the biggest influences that I've kind of been paying attention to in recent years. Been working my way through a couple of his books and try and consume just about everything there is by way of digital media on him, any videos, any interviews, podcasts, so on. So it was really cool to kind of finally put a face to the voice, so to speak, despite the fact that I obviously see him in a lot of videos, but just to see him in person and see his mannerisms and hear his speech in real time, stuff like that. I don't know what you thought of it. I thought it was crazy.
Yeah, it was really awesome to see it in person, right? Like there was no screen in the way. We weren't watching on a Jumbotron or a laptop, it was
right
face to face, essentially,
right. Yeah.
A couple meters, but
yeah.
Now,
oh, sorry.
I do think it's important to say, just because of how different each of his lectures were on this book tour. We did go to the one in Cincinnati.
Yes.
I don't remember what day that was, but we'll talk about what he shared with us, and if you went, we're definitely interested in hearing how you felt.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it was, so it was the December 2nd We Who Wrestle with God book tour stop in Cincinnati. And so, one thing that we both wanted to just kind of call out up front and mention is that we haven't actually read this book yet. We Who Wrestle with God. It's his newest book. We're still working on getting a copy personally, and we'll probably listen to it before I read it. But despite that, we knew that regardless of having not read the book yet, that there would be plenty to kind of take away from actually going to the book tour.
If anything, it's made me more excited to read the book.
For sure.
And only came out the 19th, so
yeah,
it's not super unreasonable. I bet most people there, the book sold out at the event. So
true. Yeah, true. Yeah. So, what do you think? Were you talking about the event first, or were we talking about the man first, the myth?
Probably the man, I would imagine. See why it was worth, me driving 2 hours, and, the money that we spent to go see this guy talk, he's obviously, I think he's the smartest person alive right now.
I actually, smartest is one of those weird things where there's a couple different ways you can evaluate it. But what I've said is that I definitely think he's one of the greatest figures of our time. I think, you see in the history books the likes of I don't know, Aristotle and these other big names that will always be remembered for their contribution to society, especially in philosophy. And I really think Peterson is right up, Dr. Jordan Peterson, that is right up there with those guys. I think only time will tell, and I think the way history remembers him is going to have a huge impact on whether or not the statement I'm making is true. But as far as everything I've observed and how much value and material there is to pretty much everything he says and does, I definitely think that could be the case.
Yeah, I think his time spent as a professor was definitely undervalued. The impact that he is making now. It's very different. situation where he was just talking about curriculum, right? But now he's exploring and theological stuff. Like he is literally a philosopher at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and I'll say it's a great time to mention my favorite thing about Jordan Peterson, which is that literally any given thing that he speaks about or seems to think about or is having a conversation with someone about, he takes like that isolated idea, the concept or the statement or whatever it is, and instead of just kind of like reading it at blanket value and then going with the fruit of that thing like most people do, or whatever it means, or he really takes the time to break it down in a way that is almost like he's almost mocked for it sometimes. Like you'll see these like videos where people are kind of jokingly making fun of him, and they'll be like, well, what do you mean by sky? The sky above us, like most everybody immediately understands and interprets that word to mean one thing. But Jordan Peterson is the type of person that just isn't going to I don't know, like shortcut things, I guess is the way I want to put it.
Yeah. More than just face value acceptance, right?
Yeah.
Which he talks about being higher than average in terms of agreeability for a male, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so you would think that you would go with the flow, so to say, but
sure, yeah. Well, that's the thing is sometimes, especially in like debates, that comes across as very non-compliant, so to speak. Like he's rather than just answering yes or no or agreeing or disagreeing with your point, he's trying to like catch you on your words, that sort of thing. But I really think you don't have to spend very much time at all listening to him in different contexts to recognize that that's not any practice of trying to be defiant. It's not like being stubborn or intentionally, or weaponizing, naivety, anything like that. It's strictly that the way he thinks about things, the way he interprets language, I think is really just different. I don't know how to put it better right now, but it's just different than most people, and I value that a lot. I think it's really impressive.
yeah, absolutely. And he writes just like he talks. So,
Yes,
it goes down a little bit of rabbit holes and then comes back and it all makes sense. But
yeah.
he's definitely a very, very smart guy, if not the smartest currently.
Yeah, maybe. Well, I can try to. We'll kind of start with like who he is, if in case somebody maybe hasn't ever heard of him, that sort of thing. Don't forget, we're just regular guys. This is not, I'm not reading off of his, biography or anything like that. This is just my recollection and impression of like, who I know him to be. So, as Ethan mentioned, he spent several years as a college professor at, is it Harvard, if I'm not mistaken?
No, Toronto.
Oh, Toronto.
He's Canadian, yeah.
Yeah. Hello. Yes. Yeah. So from in Canada at Toronto, and his doctorate is in psychology, right? Human psychology,
Yep.
and I believe. Can you speak more to the rest of his education? I can't remember the titles.
He's a clinical psychologist, so he takes clients and helps them through issues, right? Which I can only imagine how incredible that must be to have one-on-one problem solving with Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, imagine.
I'm sure he's helped thousands of people like that. But he was teaching psychology classes at Toronto. And he kind of ran into some trouble there. Do you recall?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So kind of the first thing that pushed him into notoriety, so to speak, was the school that he worked for started. I'm trying to think of how to, because I kind of want to summarize it but also not like misrepresent it.
Yeah, I don't want to make it look like he was being unreasonable.
right
Because it's a touchy subject right now, right?
Yeah. So the college was entertaining changing some actual policies regarding the way that the college and employees thereof and so forth were going to reference students with regard to some kind of newer, more modern, you know, terms and labels regarding, you know, gender and sexual preference and things like that, right? So like the school is going, hey, you know, there's kind of some new, I don't want to say fads, but like some new ways of doing things, and we want everyone to get on board with that. And he wasn't very appreciative of those changes, largely for the reason that they were mandated, right? It wasn't a thing like, we'd like you to do this or we encourage you to do this. It was a, you have to do this or else type of thing.
Right.
Right.
And he, explores a lot of time thinking about, tyranny, right? Like that's one of the things. And you think, okay, whatever, being forced to use the correct pronouns for someone isn't necessarily tyrannical, right? But when it's threatening your job and your livelihood, he just kind of refused to play that game. He talks about, like the Nazi camp. I think that would be a good reference of who he is more so than this. Like, Devin, do you remember that story exactly? Like the Nazi camp thing? Like, imagine yourself.
I don't remember it exactly. I know the
Yeah.
emphasis is on, you know, kind of taking on the perspective as if you were a guard at Auschwitz type thing, or if you were, and it's kind of, at first it sounds kind of shocking, like, well, I never would be, but he's saying like really put yourself in their shoes to where, okay, let's say you're a regular old guy, you have a job and you take care of your family and, you live in Germany and, all these things, you don't have strong political opinions, but then all of a sudden you get drafted. Okay. And now you are against your will being forced to, hold this position, whatever it may be. And now all of a sudden you're tied up in this whole mess, which is, everything that I think you could summarize the.
And realistically, would you do anything to stop it?
Right.
Realistically, that's a hard, and to be honest with yourself, right?
Yeah.
Like the idea in retrospect is like, yeah, I'd kill Hitler myself, but you really wouldn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You'd go to work every day just like everybody else.
Yeah, I think it's a great it's a great question. It's a great moral dilemma. Hearing him speak on it and kind of put the emphasis on different things is definitely a lot. Gives a lot more weight than we're giving it justice for right now. But real quick, I would like to interject with the fact that I'm not crazy. He apparently taught at Harvard before.
Oh, interesting.
At the university. Yeah. So that's what I was thinking of.
Or he got the treble happened in Toronto. So.
Yeah. So, but I was just kind of looking it up. So Peterson is currently 62 years old, and he spent, it looks like, about 15 years. Yeah. So, 85 to 1998. So, almost 15 years actively teaching. This was after, if I'm not mistaken, his career of being a clinical psychologist. And so, yeah, like we said, the thing that kind of first brought him into the limelight was his hard stance in opposition to the policies that the school he was at was trying to enact with regard to pronouns and different things like that. And, Peterson, a lot of people probably wouldn't have this take if they weren't honest with themselves. It didn't kind of do their research, but his position was never in opposition to the actual students. It was never in opposition to people who these things would apply to, like people who wanted their pronouns to be different or were, interested in non-gendered bathrooms. Like, he never had an issue with those particular people, or at least wasn't making any statements at the time that implied this at all. It was strictly and pretty consistently about the mandate of the use of language that the school was, putting forward. Right.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. But that's besides the point. When that put him in the spotlight, right? And then that obviously got a bunch of conservative attention, right? And they're like, yeah, which this guy is super liberal, like he's a teacher, right? It's hard to be a conservative teacher to begin with, but that kind of put some attention on his lectures, and he's an author, put some attention on his books, etc. But like for me, he talked a lot about like parenting, right, and relationships, and you find a lot of value how to be a man, really, right,
Mm-hmm.
and um, what it is to be a man, and ultimately, the religious debates that he's had, right,
Mm-hmm.
like um, very interesting, because his idea of God is not what a lot of people's is, with the guy in the white beard, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to see him debate atheist, and they kind of poke at him for that, it's really kind of like an immature version of God that the atheist is trying to poke fun of, and you kind of can't even hold a candle to Mr. Peterson's um, dialect, his conversation,
Yeah, I agree. I think there's been so many examples of this too. And you mentioned that he has spoken a lot about marriage and how to have a healthier, happier relationship. One of his biggest books and earlier books was 12 Rules for Life, which is essentially kind of like a self-help guide, right?
Yeah,
Or
absolutely.
self-help book. And but it's probably the most intensive self-help read you're ever gonna take up. But with that being said, there's so much value in there, and I think that's kind of what we mentioned. The whole thing at the school is kind of what first had people's attention drawn to him. But then he spent some time after that really gaining a lot of traction with young men and conservatives, and probably just open minded thinkers all across the country, because of you know there's a lot of value in a lot of the things that he quote unquote preaches about. Um, Now, all of that to get back to the point here, which is his most recent book, "We Who Wrestle with God," kind of the concepts thereof, and this speech that we went to see. Um, like Ethan said, I do feel like this is kind of more of a recent history thing. Like he's definitely been kind of toying around with theology and having conversations about it and stuff like that for a long time, but I feel like it's kind of become a lot more prevalent recently.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He before this book, he did the I don't remember, it was Exodus, I believe, on the Daily Wire. It was a
Yes, yeah.
short series I haven't seen, but um, definitely, recently he has been wrestling with God,
Yes, yeah,
wrestling with God quite a bit.
yeah. Which one of the things that's really interesting about that, and again, this is my perspective, but there's been a lot of times, like not a small number, but a lot of times where somebody has kind of tried to back him into a corner and ask him like what his position was on theology, on belief in God, whether or not he considered himself to be a Christian, those sort of things, and he always manages to, I don't want to say wiggle out of it, because I really don't think that that's an accurate description. But ultimately, what happens is that he answers it in a non-affirming fashion, a non-definitive fashion, where he's not making an actual claim at any point. And he usually says something along the lines of like, you know, essentially, I cannot claim that there is no God. I don't think it's, what I mean? He says like, I don't think anybody should say there is no God. And then he says, I don't know. He usually winds up saying something along the lines of, I try to live as though God exists,
Mm-hmm.
which is pretty much the closest I think he's gotten to a definitive claim as to whether or not he's a Christian or that sort of thing. And so, that's something that I really find kind of neat, is that here I am, kind of a lifelong Christian, was raised in the church, have kind of always held the same not the same, but always held a belief in God. I have spent a lot of time in recent history kind of reevaluating all that and figuring out what it means to me. And here this guy is, really someone who doesn't have all of the typical criteria to be speaking on such things. And yet I find it that he pretty consistently has some of the most like impactful, valuable, I guess, messages and takes on different biblical teachings and things like that I've ever heard. So that's really significant in my mind.
And I think part of that comes from what he said he set out to do with We Who Wrestle with God was everything that he mentioned was unfalsifiable by both science and theology, right? So he kind of has that scientific background and an interest in religion. And when you put those two together, it forms a really interesting collaboration, especially because, he's explored the Old Testament quite a bit. It's hard to read. The Old Testament is difficult to read.
Sure.
So how smart of a guy he is, right? He can intellectually put these stories to bring them to life in a sense and actually extract all of the possible lessons from it and not just kind of the surface level one that most people, kind of default to.
Yeah. Now, that's not to say, like, I definitely still have some criticisms, about the way that Peterson represents certain biblical teachings and lessons and stuff like that from a Christian perspective, or from my perspective, I guess I should say. But there's still, especially if you kind of try and approach things in a similar fashion of the way he does, which is like not taking everything exactly as it is and not, making assumptions, but instead just kind of, I think taking the value where you can type thing. I think there's plenty there. So, I think that's pretty well summarizes like kind of his influence on me and what, kind of who he is, right? You think so, Ethan?
Yeah. I just wanted to throw on to the end there, like, me, myself as an agnostic, right? I do believe in creationism. I just think it's so hard to subscribe to, the bearded guy up on the cloud. I think his kind of, I don't want to call it logical religion, but I almost think that there is room for a denomination of Christianity that really kind of appreciates this. I don't want to call it abstract thinking, but this kind of abstractness that has all of the lessons and the preachings of discipline without necessarily having to buy into the guy in the beard, right? But I say that to say, he's really got me helping. He's really helping me on my own journey, through his, which is nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the actual, our actual experience, I guess we should talk about going and seeing him.
Yeah.
So, it was here in Cincinnati, which is local to me. Bit of a drive for Ethan.
Yeah. I'm in Columbus. So, but super awesome to see Devin. It's been, too long. Absolutely too long.
Yeah. Been a while for sure. So, we got down there. It was at a kind of small venue, but a nice venue. Very near like our NFL stadium. So kind of, already hot part of town, so to speak. Luckily it was pretty late in the evening. There wasn't anything else in the city going on that was very significant. So there wasn't like a lot of traffic in my experience, except for like right when you got close to the venue, there was a lot of people trying to get into the parking
garage. Yeah, that's the only place I struggled.
Yeah, that took a little bit, but we got in there. Wasn't very hard to find our seats or anything. Now, I did want to mention this. I started to say this earlier. It was funny. We talked about getting to see him in person being significant and cool because you're kind of putting a face to this, like this identity in your mind, right? Like this I have all this collection of like who I think Jordan Peterson is, and then actually seeing that person, the person that actually represents all those things in real life, like face to face, so to speak. It really just changes a lot. I don't know. It just kind of solidifies a lot. With that being said, our seats were kind of they were kind of up there. We didn't spend a ton, and got affordable tickets. It was largely my fault because I thought that the seating and the viewing was going to be a little better than it was, but nonetheless, it was still cool.
I mean, we could have threw a football and hit him.
Yeah.
But it was still like,
yeah,
would have liked to stare into a soul a little more.
For sure.
But
yeah. and I think there's a large part of me that, like, if we ever do it again, which I'd be totally open to and
yeah, absolutely
down for, but if we were to do it again, I would definitely kind of be willing to splurge and get some seats that were, a bigger commodity and, nice and close to where you could see him well and that sort of thing. So,
yeah. After we read the book.
Yeah, after we read the book this time. Yeah. But anyway, it was a great experience. I thought that hearing him in person was not one of the things I was worried about. It was going to be very different than a lot of the content I've consumed. The books I've read and videos I've watched. He always kind of has a manner of seeming very put together and kind of always having the right thing to say, so to speak. Even sometimes he'll have these delays in his speech where he just pauses and he thinks for a minute and then he responds, and that manages to allow him to really kind of put together his thoughts, and then when he delivers it, it's like that much better, so to speak. I was kind of thinking maybe some of those things would be different in person, but in my impression, they weren't. It was very similar, very much the same, even.
Oh yeah, which makes me feel like none of it is a like persona, right? Like none of it is an act,
right?
If that makes sense,
yeah, for sure. And so, yeah. I mean, did you have anything else you wanted to add as far as the actual experience before we get into our notes?
No, it's just absolutely incredible. I'm glad that he's touring. It was awesome to see him in person. A lot of people there too, yes. Surprisingly, and a lot of different age demographics and that kind of thing. I was pleasantly surprised. I figured it would be mostly young men, like we talked about, because that kind of was his unintentional primary audience, but it was pretty diverse there, which I thought was interesting. Even a couple Jewish people were wearing yarmulkes and stuff, which he is talking mostly about the Old Testament, so I guess that's understandable. But
no, I agree. I was kind of surprised by that. I was also sort of expecting it to be mostly like a young male crowd. But it was not. It was really diverse. It was, I mean, not even a particular type of people, but just all kinds of people. So,
my only advice would be to bring more books.
Yeah,
they sold out of books by the time we got up into the line.
For sure. Yeah. Well, I'll kind of kick us off with the actual notes and kind of what he talked about, what our impression of those things were. Obviously the book is titled We Who Wrestle with God. The tour is about the book. And I would say that pretty well summarizes the overarching concept, which is, he's kind of talking about, I wouldn't even call it theology. He's talking about.
Also, I think the message he's trying to get across in this tour and, the book is kind of highlighting the struggle between, humankind's want to be lavish and, selfish, and these temporary desires that don't have long-term payoffs, that struggle with actually being, good and what's high, setting your expectations for yourself, right? That discipline that comes along with being a better person. that kind of struggle between the two, I think he's trying to highlight as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think there definitely seems to be a pretty big focus. I mean, it's not so much of, at least in what we saw, what he covered and talked about. Again, we haven't read the book yet, but it wasn't so much entertaining questions of like, is there a God, or if there is a God, why this, like anything like that. It's more about like the principles and concepts of morality as a whole, and kind of like why we live our lives in certain ways, what the kind of transcendent truth is of several claims of the Bible, that sort of thing. So
Right.
definitely a weighty, chunky, lot to it kind of thing.
Yeah, the figure itself doesn't mean as much as what benefit do you have from living this way, right? And a lot of the short term, hedonistic, dirty, sinful, you could say, ways of living have very small long term return, right?
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
not a very good ROI on, getting drunk every day.
Right.
So,
Right.
him highlighting the values of a good life, right? And why you should choose to live as if God does exist.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so he spoke for probably what was it? I want to say it was only like 45 minutes, but it felt so much longer than that.
Oh, really? Yeah, I wasn't paying attention to the time.
Well, and I remember
Yeah.
him making a statement about it. He said, "I'm going to talk to you guys for about this long, and I'm going to take
Oh, and then a
questions." Maybe it
Q&A,
was,
yeah.
yeah, maybe it was like an hour and a half. It was roughly like somewhere in there, 45 minutes to an hour 15. So he spoke for about that long, and covered a number of things. I would say he kind of had a few focuses in what he was actually speaking about. And I know I'm about to butcher it and not recall them all or in the right order, but one of the things like we just talked about was kind of just generally about morality. He kind of referenced, made lots of references to um, your intent and your perception and your aim, what it is that you're aiming for and what you're leaving behind and things like that. And he made a couple of references to God and the identity of God, and like some examples we see of God, such as and now I know I've blanked on this every time I try to think about it. Who is it that talked about the still small voice? Elijah.
Oh, yeah. Yep. Elijah, when he was in the boat where he was running
Yes.
away. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yeah. So wait, is that Elijah? Or are you thinking of Jonah?
No, Elijah.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Jonah
So
was
anyway,
in the.
I mean, he was on a boat running away.
Oh, he was on the boat running away. Elijah.
Who knows?
Elijah.
We'll get our Bible stories sorted out in a second, but I'm pretty sure it is Elisha who in the Bible talks about God being a still small voice, and he talks a little bit about that, and kind of just the significance of it, and then also there's a couple more things for sure. Towards the end, when he started doing Q&As, he talked a little bit about kind of yourself. How would you put that? Yourself moderation, and how to make sure that you're treating yourself correctly and living life the way that you're intending to, and that sort of thing. So
Yeah,
lots of
absolutely.
different, covered a lot of different bases. You feel like kind of hitting us up with that first one?
Yeah, if I can remember what Elijah did. They had similar stories. One of them was going to Sodom and Gomorrah, which was not Jonah.
Right.
Jonah
No,
was
that's
actually able to save the town, correct? The
right.
other one.
Yes.
I
Yes.
forget which one that one was.
Yeah.
But
No. So yeah. You're good.
Elijah went to, yeah, whatever. We'll have to read the books at some point, but um the main things that he talked about really was perception, right? and not only your perception, but how what you want in life affects your perception, right? So there was a good quote. I think you had it written down, Devin. What was the?
Yeah, your perception of the world is a reflection of your intent. Is that what when you were talking about?
Yeah. So
Yeah, so that was something like we put it in quotations because like he said that, and I think it hit both of us. We were like, "What?" It was kind of a big, weighty statement. The only person we can attribute to saying that is Jordan Peterson, as far as we know. And to explain it a little bit, what he was talking about at the time was he was talking about how what you see, your perception, obviously what the statement says is a reflection of your intent, but he's talking about how you kind of see what you want to see, so to speak, um, and how everyone's perception is kind of skewed towards what it is that they're looking for.
right.
Good way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what he took it the next level, right? So he goes, obviously, that's not really mind blowing that what you see or what you want is what you see, right? Like if you go looking for trouble, you're going to find it, right? Like a lot of people have kind of made that conclusion, in some way or another. However, he took it the next step and said, not only is that the case, however, saying that is true, right? Assuming that is true, other people can perceive your intent by your perception, right?
Right.
So I don't know if we have a quote from him that exactly what he said there, but essentially, you can tell what I'm looking for based on what I am seeing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And that's something that I think, again, hearing input thing, the way he puts things is just so much better than we're gonna, be able to do here. But that's something that, like, when I hear you say it and you kind of rephrase it and that sort of thing, it kind of immediately rings true, right? Where it's like, I think of people, maybe an extreme example with someone who I feel their perception is just kind of whack. It's just like, how is it that you think things are that way? And to me, that's something that kind of immediately seems true, is that it's reflective of their beliefs. It's reflective of what they, kind of are reading out of the situation, or reading into the situation rather than instead of just reading out of the situation, and all kinds of things. So yeah,
it's baggage that you bring along with you to a situation, right?
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things you said about that, when we went to the little pub afterwards, was I wonder if there's a way to kind of fight against that, right? Like
Right.
to not bring the baggage with you when you look. Keep your intent out of the perception so that you can observe unbiasedly, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because that would obviously be hugely beneficial if that was something you could practice. Like if you were someone that valued being unbiased and being neutral and perceiving things for what they really were, seeing both sides of the story, all those things. That's something that would be very valuable, is to make sure that your intent, that your intentions, that your underlying beliefs, your subconscious opinion, all those things aren't influencing the way that you are taking in information and looking at a situation, that sort of thing.
Right.
So
Yeah, but another reason why that is important is because of if you get what you're looking for, right, you should always be looking for what serves you and your family and your loved ones the best, right? So
right.
you kind of need to aim. He talked about Jacob's ladder,
Mm-hmm.
and he said, literally visualize a staircase, and it goes up and up and up, and at the top is what you need to aim for, right? So whether that be, prosperity for your family, or, finding, improving your skills so that you find a better job, whatever your highest good at the moment is, should be at the top of that staircase, which is also where you're aiming to get to, right? So what you should perceive when you're looking for things is you'll notice what each of those steps are, right? So like,
Yeah.
You'll see the step and know that that's like the right way to go up, right?
Yeah. Well, and one of the things I liked about this was it was kind of like there was kind of two parts to it. He was talking about, aim up, basically set your sights on, align your goals with what is good or what is the most beneficial to you and your loved ones and the most generally valuable and all this, and really kind of really emphasizing the moral sense of it, right? Which is, not just like we talked about in the beginning, not this like very temporary satisfaction kind of thing, but like what is the most ultimate good that you can be trying to achieve. So there's that, but then there's also the other side of it, which is that, if at any point you are aiming for one thing and you're moving towards that thing, you're going to be leaving other stuff behind, right? Like you're going away from something when you're moving in one direction and when your sights are set. And he really kind of put some emphasis on that part of it as well, being, sacrifice,
right?
Which is a very heavily, if you're familiar with the Bible at all or Christianity at all, or, these sort of things,
or stoicism, stoicism.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Sacrifice is a huge repeating component of these things.
Oh, and Christianity, it's, when you think of Christianity, you think of the cross, which was the ultimate, the ultimate sacrifice.
Right. Yeah. Which kind of, I think in a single line doesn't really do the whole thing justice. But
That's true.
More on that in a future episode. More on that later. Yeah. Did you have anything else to just say about Jacob's Ladder and the aim?
Like you said, the real thing is setting your sights, and not only what can get you there, but what can stop you from getting there, right? Yeah. So, for example, if happy marriage is your highest goal, you should probably stay away from the strip club or things that detract you and take you off those stairs or make you take a step down, bring you down a rung on the ladder.
Well, and so there were a couple of I feel like you really tied this into both stories that we kind of referenced and got conflated earlier, which was he talked about Elijah and he talked about Jonah, the story of Jonah. Essentially, God tells him to go to Nineveh, and we'll just, in a very summarized fashion, say preach there, right? Like go preach, tell them about God. And, Nineveh is like notoriously an awful place where nobody wants to be. So Jonah says no, and he runs. He like literally tries to flee from God, basically jumps on a boat and heads in the opposite direction. Which I thought this was interesting because, I kind of, I'm familiar with the VeggieTales story of this, and they kind of imply this. But to hear Dr. Jordan Peterson say that it was literally the furthest place that you could go from Nineveh, I thought was interesting. Like it had a little bit of like a literal credibility to it. I forget, with Tarshish maybe is where he was trying to go, and it's apparently like literally the furthest that he could try to go
of the known world at the time.
Yeah. Which I thought was funny, but and then he talks about Sodom and Gomorrah a bit.
Now that you have corrected the stories, right, I do want to point out how like impactful that story actually is. How much he doesn't want to go. He thinks he'll be ridiculed, if not killed, beaten,
right.
And he doesn't want to go, and his cohorts that are out to sea with him don't even necessarily want to make him go, even when the waters get rough, right? Like they essentially won't even throw him to the wolves. They know how bad of an idea it is, right? On paper.
Yeah.
And then he makes the sacrifice to be tossed off into the water or whatever, and then to go into the lion's den and speak the truth, right? and speaking that truth is, it was a needed, right? It put things right.
Yeah, which, if I'm remembering the story correctly, one thing that's pretty interesting about that is like when he, at the point of, and again, this is in reference to Jonah and the story that I was just talking about, but at the point of deciding to throw himself off the ship, that was kind of, from what I've read and understand, a giving up. It was like a point of giving up. It wasn't. He didn't come around yet to say, "Oh, I'm going to be obedient to God," but instead he said, you know, he felt that God was punishing him for his disobedience, and he kind of was just giving into that, so to speak. And that's when he gets like eaten by the whale, and then he like lives in the whale for a little bit, and then it's at some point in that experience when he's in the whale that he reapproaches God and basically asks for a second chance, and God gives it to him, and the whale spits him out right on the shore of the city that he was supposed to go to, type thing, right?
Very convenient.
Yeah. Which, like, again, that's a summary. Maybe there's more to it, but Peterson even had a pretty interesting take on that, which was he was talking about how, looking at it from a very literal standpoint, as the actual story is written and the way that you would read it and that sort of thing. He was talking about how the whale changed him, how the whale was this kind of like, in a sense, this metaphorical like experience, right? This I'm trying to think of a different way to put that. Got anything for me? I don't know, an experience that wound up changing him and leaving him in a different place than he was before, like literally.
No, yeah.
So, but anyways, and so I don't know if you were going to mention this, but I was going to say, one of the things that I love about that story of Jonah going to Nineveh is that he pretty much winds up converting the whole city.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, it talks about the whole city changed their ways, type thing. And there's really a lot to that, because it speaks a lot to individual significance, which I kind of have more on shortly. But this was one guy. Like God came to one guy and he said, "I want you to go take on this whole city."
Right.
And he thought, surely that's like, no way that's happening. I'm just gonna get killed. I'm not gonna, like, I don't even have any help or anybody there with me. Like, but it ends up working out. And then
he goes and it's the power you mentioned, the power of the individual. He went and said what he thought, and at that point knew to be true, right? And the truth metaphorically set everyone free, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's definitely some, like, along the journey, some like you just said, at that point knew to be true. There's some reaffirming and some validation of like these different things. Like if he's doubting God and saying, I don't know, having whatever question of belief at that point. If this, first of all, you survive being in a whale. If we do, if we're taking everything literally, you survive living in a whale, and then you get spit out right on shore where you were told to go. Like, that kind of settles some doubts,
right? And once he gets there, he calms the storm. It was hard for people to doubt anymore, right?
Right.
So, and that could be, metaphor for just, speaking the truth about a situation that to be true, but other people are doing opposites on, right?
Right. Yeah. And then anyway, kind of back on the same topic of like your aim, also the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, it's kind of similar to where God tells him to go plead with the cities basically and tell them to change their ways. Or no, that's not right. I think it's actually God tells him, hey, these cities are terrible. They're corrupt. There's no one good left in them. I'm going to smite them.
Yeah.
Type thing.
Yep.
Right.
And he goes, well, no, you don't have to do that.
Yeah. He's like, oh, surely there must be, some good people left, God. Like, don't destroy the whole city. And he kind of tries to make a deal with him and says, like, if I can find 100 good people, will you spare the city? Right?
Yeah.
And God's like, okay, if you can find 100 good people, I'll spare the city. And he says, well, what if I can find 50 good people? And God says, okay, 50 good people. He's like, what if I can find 40 good people? And he kind of he keeps working like this and kind of doing that, getting it lower.
He doesn't
and
have
lower.
time to interview everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so they wind up settling on 10. He says, if I can find 10 good people, will you spare the city? The entire city is corrupt and evil and violent, and denounces you with the exception of 10 people. Will you still show them mercy? And God says okay. He agrees with it. And I kind of forget. I'll be honest. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is one I'm not terribly. I've read it, but I'm not terribly familiar with it. I kind of forget where it goes from there.
Well, it's they're very sexually depraved. That's sodomy, right? Like,
yeah. Right.
So they don't really talk about that one a bunch on Veggie Tales.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, but I think Peterson didn't stay on that the actual biblical reference of it for very long, because he kind of was making his point right there, which was again kind of back to individual significance. Right. It is not only there's not only significance in the fact that I believe this was Elijah in this case. This is where we were thinking of him.
Yes.
That Elijah was able to kind of barter with God, so to speak. But kind of that Elijah, by showing interest and hope in saving or redeeming even a few people, was able to sway God, but also just in that God got down to 10 people. I mean, we're talking about two huge cities here, probably full of at least, we'll just say thousands, right? It's probably hundreds of thousands, right, but we'll just say thousands of people. And he full on expresses that 10 good people, even amongst those numbers, would still be worth it to him. Yeah,
absolutely. So the kind of the conversation we had afterwards was, that is, it's calculated out to think about the good that you can do. Right. So
right.
like, even in, your small little town, it's not about being better than your neighbors, but it's about your little contribution can mean, much more than you think it does.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We were talking about how in any given situation, maybe at work, like you work with a bunch of people that, are all set in their ways, and their ways are different than yours and whatever. And you might feel outnumbered. You might feel like your influence is too small to actually be able to affect change, but you could be one of 10, right? Like you could be, or not even, that's not even the proper way of saying it is you could be 10 in, a million. Like you could be that small little number that is still giving value to the whole thing in God's eyes.
You could be the only person keeping your business afloat. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like to take it into a much more literal sense, your productivity against your coworkers could be keeping the business alive. Right. Yeah, and I kind of think that's what the metaphor is, obviously in a less capitalistic kind of way, but I think that's literally what the metaphor is trying to say, is your little good that you think that you are doing is much less little when it's, extrapolated out to your community.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great way of putting it. Yeah. And then probably, so, that was a lot about Jacob's ladder and aim and your goals and that sort of thing. I think probably one of the other things that you hit on a lot that was pretty impactful to both of us was the still small voice concept, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Which you're open to talking about if you want, but I got thoughts.
Well, I was just going to say the biggest point for me, and then I'll let you introduce it. The biggest point for me is the fact that when he said you can't convince it otherwise, right? Like you have no control over what it tells you, right? So go ahead and
yeah. So Jordan Peterson pretty strongly equated. So there's a Bible verse that where I think it is again Elijah talks about how he's talking about how he's looking for God, and he's looking for God in like these magnificent, strong, thunderous storms, and he's looking for God in the beauty of the dew on the grass in the morning and all these things. And he kind of talks about how he looked for God in all these places, and he saw, I think he actually says something along the lines of like that he saw reflections of God or that he saw signs of God, but that where he actually feels that God lies is in the still small voice. And I don't know if there's more to it or not, but we'll just go with that. And so Jordan Peterson was kind of talking about the value of that verse and kind of what he takes from it. And he was talking about, or he pretty strongly equated that, the still small voice, to our, I want to make sure I keep saying the wrong word, our conscience. Yeah, conscience. I keep wanting to say, but and your conscience being the concept that you have a sense of right from wrong that isn't taught, basically, right?
Yeah,
there's a better way to put it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of innate. It's innate and guides you even when you don't want to hear it.
Yeah. And so kind of talking about and defining, our conscience, a couple of the things he says about it, which we thought were just really cool, where, he says it's internal, which, most people feel like they hear it, right? Like that it's a still small voice is a good description, because it's kind of like, the angel on your shoulder sometimes or something like that, where it's kind of like this influence from inside. But then he talks about that it's transcendent, in that one thing that's really significant and kind of hard to account for is that everyone's still small voice, everyone's conscience seems to be aimed in the same direction, right? Like each and every person, regardless of their circumstance or whatever, when trying to aim towards what goals they think are upmost or whatever, or not even that, not even where they set their aim, but when they're listening to their conscience and allowing it to guide them in whatever way, like it tends to always
it'll advise, but you can set your aim completely devoid of its input. Right?
Yeah, right,
it's not a good idea.
Right. Yeah, but just the fact that everyone's conscience seems to have the same positive, upward, more beneficial than not aim in mind, right?
Right.
And then what was the third thing? Let me see if I can.
That you can't argue with it. Well, you can argue with it, but you can't control it.
Yes, that you can't control it. That it's clearly not. Which this is one of those things where I feel like you have to be really intellectually honest, and you have to be honest with yourself. You have to you have to be aware and kind of like, self-aware is what I'm trying to say, and analytical, and recognize that because I can do this. I recognize that my conscience and what I associate that with, what I think of, is definitely a thing that I don't control, and it also doesn't seem to be a product of my intentions. It doesn't seem to be a product of my learned, like anything I've learned type thing.
It's very odd, because it exists in a world where I can have a conversation with it right now, right? And it's not always this black and white of like a literal conversation, but I can kind of feel its intent, right? But it does talk to you. It literally talks to you sometimes. It'll say we
sometimes you interpret
this.
It. Right. Yeah. Sometimes you literally interpret it in a voice. Yeah, for sure.
So I know exactly what you're talking about, what he's talking about, and it's very interesting to me. This concept, I think, may have been one of the most impactful of the night.
Yeah, and I agree with you, and I think it's one that you kind of have to. Again, I've said it a couple of times. I'll say it again. You kind of have to hear him say it. You kind of have to hear him talk about it, and the way he puts it, it holds even more weight and more value. But we both found it to be very valuable, and it's now, with that being said, I will say this: I don't know that I'm ready to summarize God to that, reduce him to that. I don't think that he's just a little Tinkerbell in our pocket that guides us. In my beliefs, he's a whole lot more. But and actually, I don't even know that I would. I feel inclined to say that I would associate that thing that we're describing, our conscience, with the Holy Spirit, more than than what most people are referring to when they say God.
Well,
right?
yeah, but so let's assume that our souls, right, know of their home. They know where they came from, right? Could that not be them wanting to get back home? And that's why they kind of lead you in a certain way.
Yeah, sure. I mean, definitely an interesting perspective.
Yeah. I just think the whole thing is interesting because, I mean, I have very clearly acted against it, multiple times, and it kind of it quiet now. It goes, oh, okay, like it's disappointed and it fades away.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're right. There is a big thing about it, like going away, like, and you kind of, oh man, that's crazy.
It's very interesting to me.
Yeah. Huh. Well, yeah, I'm kind of having trouble remembering what more he had to say about it besides those points that we made. We did have a note here that I thought you might want to say something about, which is, or related to this, which is, which eye are you talking about?
Yeah. So I was listening to something Jordan Peterson said, a couple weeks ago. He said he was talking about like sacrifice and stuff, of course, and the concept behind this discussion was, well, why do I have to sacrifice these things when I like them? I want to do them. And he goes, well, which eye are we talking about? Are we talking about I right now in a selfish, self-defeating, self-destructive I? Or are we talking about the I in 10 years, or the I that could be, the I that could exist, right? Because every time you make a decision, right, it changes who you are fundamentally, right? And if you're making the I that wants to make these nasty bad decisions are very different than the I that could exist, with the correct decision. So I just thought that was interesting that you kind of exist in multiple forms, right? Like it's different eyes. It literally is, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I actually even attribute one of those eyes, like he kind of talks in that example that you gave of kind of future self and present self. But I actually think one of those eyes could even be what we were just referencing, which is your conscience. Like we said, it's there's a way that it's kind of external in that it's not it's not a product of you necessarily. Like you're not influencing it or determining it, but it's internal because you experience it and kind of hear it and that sort of thing. But in a lot of people's minds, it is kind of like they feel a sense of self regarding it.
Yeah.
Like it's a part of them. And so like that could be one of the eyes that you are.
Yeah, absolutely. If that's because I'm playing around with the idea that could be like your soul, right? And if that is your soul, that is the purest and highest form of you, right? Like it exists within all of the good that you have the capacity to do. So if that's the I we're talking about, he certainly doesn't want me to take out a motorcycle loan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we did an okay job of covering most of the.
His IQ is higher than both of ours combined.
Ours combined, yeah, for sure. Ours combined is doubled, maybe. But yeah, we've kind of said from the get go that we were going to try and talk more about our interpretations of these things and our experience of hearing it, rather than trying to just like really word for word what he was saying.
Yeah, we can't give you the TLDR. The amount of time it would take for us to even fully comprehend the statements, right?
Yeah, to think through all the yeah, exactly, all the ins and outs of each thing.
But the observations that he makes through thinking through those observations are invaluable, right? Like they're priceless.
Yeah, well, and I think that is the kind of the thing that let me think of how to put this. I think that's what we can do that is the most valuable too, is take the time to think through what he's presenting, and the same way he's taken the time to think through, the subject material of it,
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, is like, guarantee you, absolutely guarantee you, he did not and would not reference something like the story of Jonah and the whale and Nineveh without having probably read it, front to back, so to speak,
10 times, yeah.
10 times, at least, probably 20, 50 times, and then thought about it for maybe 5 years, and then, felt comfortable.
Well, contemplating, the complexities of the beast, right? Is it a literal beast? Is it the journey? Is the journey the beast? Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
well, and that's a great point you bring up. I keep calling it a whale because I've always kind of like just associated with a whale ever since, I was young. But it's not perfectly clear.
It could be a whale.
It could be a whale.
Yeah.
It's not definitive that it's a whale, but I just kind of call it a whale. That's funny though. But yeah, so absolutely. I think. Okay, what are your takeaways? What are your main takeaways?
That, like I said earlier, I think there's really a realm for a lot of people like me. This is an avenue, almost a permission slip, right? To engage in theological thinking, and especially the teachings and lessons of the Abrahamic Bible, the God of Yahweh, without necessarily subscribing to, a man up in the clouds, because it's much more valuable than that, right? Like, that's the easy. If everything was perfect, we would have a dad up in the clouds, right? Like, that would be the easiest, most beneficial way that things could exist, right? Like, that would be great. I would love that. However, there's still value in it, even if that's not exactly the case, right? And sorry to keep rambling here, but Jordan Peterson also talked about, he said, humanity needs this, because when you lose that pursuit of good, right? Like that pursuit of good for yourself, not good in like some kind of abstract, weird way, not in like an avoiding sin way, although that's a byproduct of the good, right? When you lose that want for good, it's replaced by hedonism, nihilism, even sadism to a certain degree, right? Like that good is lost and replaced with things much, much worse. And you don't want to live life like that.
Yeah, I really appreciate that take on it, because I will say that is a fair bit different than mine. But I think kind of on what you just said there, it kind of makes me think of like apathy. Like I've always kind of considered, because you talked about nihilism, and I do think nihilism's like ultimately awful. I mean, I think it's something that some people entertain as being an actual worldview that's like got any merit to it, but I think it's absolutely the opposite of that. And I kind of see being apathetic as a product of that, or very similar to that, to where you're just not invested in either direction, so to speak.
And that is like the most dull way to live, I feel like. You're just a slave to your impulses. You have no, you know what I mean? Like it's not beneficial, and you're certainly not a man of value if you live like that.
Right. And so while I find a lot more, like, again, from my worldview and my beliefs, I find kind of a lot more application and like, I guess seeing the world with a sense of order that I do. But if I was trying to see things like, the way I guess, it sounds like you see them or whatever, I agree that like the value that you can abstract alone, like that by itself in a bubble, is kind of worth exploring. Now, with that being said, I do think there's a good argument for that value that inherently exists being evidence of something more.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's kind of where it's difficult, because most likely we will never know, right? most likely, well, until you do. Most likely we'll never know until it doesn't the thinking about it doesn't matter anymore.
I'll take it a step further. I think you will definitively not ever know whether or not, like, as an actual matter of fact, whether or not God exists until you meet him.
Yeah, until it's very, very clear.
Yes, until it's too late to be making up your mind. Yeah. So that's kind of the point.
Yeah. So I think it's, it's kind of one of those things where it can go so abstract, right? And literally it is beyond our comprehension, right? Like there's only a couple ways that it's not literally behind our but above our comprehension, but even those ways still are, like a simulation. Like we can kind of get the idea, right? Like, okay, we're in a computer, but can we comprehend that computer? No. Can we comprehend the why? Can we comprehend potentially? No. Even that's above our comprehension. And then when you start bringing magic or supernatural things, like, magic is kind of a degrading way to say it, right? Like it really could just be so above our level of understanding that we will not know until we are there, right?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I would venture to say, which, again, this is a future podcast episode, us like really exploring, kind of theology and our different perspectives on things. But I would venture to say that it not only could be that, but it almost is likely to be that, right? Like there's kind of like a demand for it to be inexplicable, a demand for it to be above our understanding and beyond our comprehension. Like that, it's almost a part of the, the requirements checklist.
Right. Because if it wasn't, we could eventually like get there. Like we go yell at them.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, honestly, to some degree, it's kind of like this is a weird connection I'm making in my mind right now. Maybe somebody else will get it, but like, I'm thinking of like cloning ourselves, right? Like that's a classic, like, 80s movie future thing where people can clone themselves. It's like, to be honest, today, right now, that's not that far out of the realm of possibility as far as like cell replication and like,
I think it's more of a moral issue than a technological.
Well, there's a moral issue, but there's the biggest part, which is that we have no stinking idea, not the first step of how to replicate a soul, this consciousness. Like those are things that you can't just put through the scanner and go, oh, here,
Yeah, like we've made sheep. Why can't we make people yet?
Yes, exactly. That's what I mean.
And, and if we did, would it really work? Would it be like us?
Oh, I doubt that. That'd be freaking weird. But yeah, I mean, in my mind, that kind of speaks to that, what we're talking about, which is kind of the demand for it to be more.
Yeah.
So those are great takeaways. I liked your takeaways. My takeaway, I think the biggest one is going to be, it's going to have to be the perception one. I really did appreciate the all the ways that he was speaking about individual significance and importance, because that's something that I kind of struggle with. It's not like I get like down in the dumps, like, oh, I'm just a number, but like I do care to and value being impactful in what I do, right? Like I want the things that I do to be lasting and to be valuable and to be, in such a fashion that I'll be proud of them in a few years. Like that's how I generally try and make choices.
Right.
So those things were valuable to me, but what is even higher on my totem pole is perception. And I just think perception in general as a concept, as the way we apply it and talk about it and interpret it, is so significant to our lives, and people are so like generally unaware, which is kind of an ironic thing to say when talking about perception.
Unaware of perception. And
unaware. Yeah.
I think that is the most practical bit of advice there. Was not only, that you will find what you're looking for, right? Good and bad, but also you're wearing your perception, you're wearing your intention on your sleeve because of other people's perception. Like I think when people worry about other people's perception, they worry about vain and non-consequential things like, oh, I hope I look good. I hope I'm, making this person happy. Right. but
Right.
you're not really considering what they are perceiving. You're considering how you allow them to perceive, but that's not really, you don't get to dictate that, right? Like it's very, that one's a tough one, but it's a good one to keep in mind, right? That your intentions are shown to people.
And one little thing, this kind of gets back into the actual like meat of it, but one little thing that I think we kind of forgot to mention was, you know, he very early on, he kind of was talking about how to, he was kind of making a joke of it, but he was talking about how to avoid being self-conscious on stage.
Oh, yeah.
On stage speaking to us, like towards the beginning of his speech. And he was kind of talking about like a very, very simple summary is like, don't make it about yourself.
Right.
Like, you know, you get up there and you start talking, you're thinking through what it is that you want to present. Don't be like acting. Don't be, what was the word he actually used?
It's not a performance.
Yes, a performance. Yeah. Don't be putting on a performance and then being concerned with like your ratings, you know.
Oh, yeah.
And what the critics are going to say and that sort of thing. And this sort of brings me back to this perspective thing, because realistically, if you it gets into a cyclical thing, which is if your intent is to be perceived in a specific way by people, okay, then as we already learned, your perception is going to be a product of your intent. So first of all, you're going to see, you know, reflections of that. And then also, if that's the only thing you're concerning yourself with regard to other people's perception, then they're going to see that that's what you're concerned with, and so on and so forth.
Right,
it's like,
right. It's kind of like how I'm in a sales job, right? If I'm overly nice to people in an ingenuine way, they just think I'm trying to sell them something. Yeah, but if I'm actually, if I actually care about, you know, you and what your needs are, they'll probably pick up on that more so than me just trying to sell them something.
Right. Yeah. And so I think that, you know, the emphasis is really to focus on your intent. Like if you do want to be perceived a certain way, oh, well, I want people to think I'm strong. Okay. Well, don't focus on making people think you're strong, right? Don't focus on whether or not people think you're strong.
Get strong.
Focus on being strong.
Yeah.
Like that's it. Like, you know, and so I don't know. That was for me.
Yeah,
you know, there was a lot to that, and it's something I kind of already think about a lot. So
yeah, but I think if the number one takeaway from that is just that bit of mindfulness of, you know, other people's perception exist on a much more deeper level than the vain idea of it in your head.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that's it. Ooh, I hadn't even really thought that one. That's pretty big right there. Yeah, because that's something that's really interesting, actually, because I apply a lot more value inherently to my own perception than I do other people's.
And I think that's normal. That's a pretty natural thing. But when he said that quote, right, like that really, you know, stuck out to me. You definitely overvalue your own perception, which you might be more perceptive than some people, sure, but that doesn't mean that their perception is not much deeper than you think it is.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a great way of putting it. Well, I think that is pretty close to a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah. Do you want to run a random opinion for this episode?
Oh, a random opinion. I don't know if I'm ready for a random opinion yet. I didn't bring one.
Coming soon.
Yeah, coming soon, a new segment where we give you our random opinion. Yeah, there was, I did have a little side note of a thing to talk about, but I think we pretty well filled the time just talking about Dr. Jordan Peterson and our experience getting to see him for the first time. It was my first time. I think yours too.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. And all therein. So
I encourage everyone to buy a ticket while the tour is still going.
Yeah, go check out the tour, buy his books, watch some content. Very worth your time, in my opinion.
Yeah, and not even as, you don't have to be a man, you don't have to be a Christian, you don't have to be any of those things, as long as you value thought and free speech. That's all you need.
Yeah. That is a great criteria for Jordan Peterson. I've never really thought about that. If you value thought, you'll love him.
Yeah. It's hard to explain who he is.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well,
but that's just our opinion.
Yeah, that's just our opinion. Yeah. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time. We got lots more to talk about in the future. So,
woo! See you guys.